Hi and welcome back. This is Police Stories Podcast and I'm Dave and this is episode 22. So today we're going to talk about drink drivers and then a specific incident that I dealt with. Drink drivers, very much a scourge of the world we live in, unfortunately. There's been campaigns for years, hasn't there, on the news and in the papers, etc., to try and get people to be more aware of how much drinking can affect your ability to drive. And certainly I think it has got better. 20-30 years ago, without a doubt, it was much more sort of socially acceptable, but now you have things, thankfully, where people kind of have a designated driver on the night, etc. But unfortunately, like every other cop out there, no matter where you work in the world, I'd suggest you've seen some absolute carnage from drink drivers, and they'll come out with all the excuses in the world, for a period of time. Certainly I remember 20 years ago, in the UK, people would say, oh, you can have, 2 pints, of beer, for example, no problems at all, and you'll be fine, but actually it isn't as easy as that. It's not as clear cut because it depends on, what you've been drinking, how much you've eaten that night, how much you've exercised in the day. There's so many factors. And also, you say, well, 2 pints of what? 2 pints of low level lager that's maybe 4%, or 2 pints of, nutcracker, horrendous, Anvil, killer ale that's, 11 or 12% or something ridiculous. You can imagine 2 pints of that is very different to 2 pints of a low level lager. So, yes, unfortunately, seen lots of drink driving and heard all the excuses, to be honest with you. Certainly the two sort of classic ones in the UK, and this is probably the same in other parts of the world, although they may be called different things. One is what's called the hip flask defence. So again, this is a classic, you've got the scenario where you get called to, say, an accident, turn up at the scene of, and these things change their name as well. They're currently called, I believe, RTCs, road traffic crashes, because they were RTAs, road traffic accidents, but the feeling was that, well, they were never accidents, they were crashes. Someone was at fault and therefore they're RTCs. But whatever you call them, accidents, crashes, it doesn't matter. The same thing, two cars hitting each other, or maybe, a lamppost or a house or a person or whatever it is. So yeah, lots of death and destruction out there, unfortunately. But this hip flask defence, what happens is you get called to, say, to the scene of an accident. You turn up and one of the cars has gone, and you've got poor old Mrs. Miggins there who says, guy drove into me, he got out, or he didn't stop. He basically had a quick look at the damage. I thought I could smell drink on him, and then he drove off, and he drives, a black car, and this is the registration number. Or you manage to speak to another witness, he gives you the registration number of the car. So you figure out the address, and then one or two things happens. You go round to the address of the registered keeper of that car, and the classic is you ring the doorbell, they open the door, and they're standing there with, whiskey in their hand, or a can of beer, or whatever it is, some sort of alcoholic drink in their hand. And you say to him, hi, understand you're the owner of, a black Vauxhall Astra, registration number, blah, blah. And he's like, yeah, that's right, yeah. So at this point, he's either going to tell you, well, yeah, it's on the drive, or it's just outside my house, there it is. And then he's going to look out and look ever surprised and go, oh, I can't believe it. My car's gone. Someone must have stolen it. Kind of, any sort of seasoned cop standing there giving it, of course it is Pinocchio, and basically they're going to tell you that their car was stolen and they have no clue. The other one is that they'll say, oh, they had an accident and they thought they'd exchanged details or whatever it is, and then to calm their nerves when they got home, they immediately had a massive drink, this huge whiskey or whatever it is, just to calm my nerves. That's all it is. And obviously they're thinking that, when because you do have powers in most circumstances to actually enter their house and still breath test them within their house, even though they'll tell you, once again, as we talked about before, where's your warrant? I want to see your warrant. You don't need a warrant in most of those circumstances. Now, the drink drive law is very confusing in the UK, even for cops. There's a lot of little bits to it, so you have to really be on your game in terms of knowing your powers. So it doesn't hurt, on the way to a job where you're thinking, this guy's, not going to let us in, he's going to be on the hip flask defence. You have a quick brush up on your powers just to make sure you got powers of entry and stuff. Certainly by the time I went to an address, knocked on the door, I would know exactly what I could and couldn't do there. So yeah, but that's okay. People think they're being clever. Hip flask defence. I've had my big drink at home. That way the cops will never know the fact that I was actually drink driving. They think that they're the first person to ever have thought of this defence. But the reality is, what happens is, so he's standing there with his, big old whiskey on the go. You seize the whiskey. You ask him which bottle it came from. You seize the bottle. Or the pint glass or whatever it is. You seize everything basically, which again you're allowed to do without a warrant. So you've got the bottle, you've got the glass, you've got the amount of fluid, and basically what can happen is the scientists can do a count back. So you can record how many millilitres of liquid you've got. You can record the strength of it. You've taken the bottle and they say, well, I've only just opened it and this is the big drink I've had out of it. Or if they say, well, I've had 2 beers since I got home, that's fine. You take the empty beer bottles, and then the scientists will work out, right, he's had 2 500ml bottles of 5% lager, because he will still get breath tested and almost certainly arrested and taken to the police station and then put on so you have an initial, what's called a screening device, which is the one that you carry in the car with you, and you would breath test them at the scene on this. Now, I've seen, obviously, like in America, for example, they have their sobriety tests, don't they, where they have them sort of walking about and touching their finger on their nose with their eyes closed and doing sort of heel to toe walking and stuff. We've never had that in the UK. We've always had some sort of, well, not to my knowledge anyway, we've always had some sort of breath testing machine. And originally, like way back before I started, so we're talking probably 35 years ago, there was like a plastic bag that had some crystals in it. And you basically got them to blow in this tube and the crystals turn colour if there was alcohol present. That was the real sort of first breath test that I'm aware of. But they've come a long way, and now, they'll give us an exact reading and they're remarkably accurate on the side of the road. However, regardless of that changing on the side of the road will allow you to get a good idea, of exactly whether they're over the limit enough to arrest them. And then once you arrest them and you take them back to the police station, they go on to a much more sensitive machine back at the nick at the police station, and that will give you an absolute bang on reading, and that thing is calibrated very regularly, has engineers coming out to test it, so you 100% can go to court and say for sure, this was the reading that machine gave. That machine is calibrated. There's absolutely no wriggling out of it, And if they're, say, double the limit, the scientists will be able to work back and say, these 2 bottles that they drank of 5% lager would not have put them, twice the limit. They can work that out. So therefore, you can 100% prove that they were driving under the influence, And of course, it has big effects on most people, and it doesn't matter how many times you try and get this across to people, they just don't realise, and I appreciate some people are alcoholics and have a real problem and they're beyond caring, but invariably people are quite often going to lose jobs over it. If they're losing jobs, they might be losing houses, they're losing marriages, you name it, you can lose it through the drink drive. I'm not trying to preach, I'm just saying how it is, So yeah, drink drivers, very, very difficult. So on this particular occasion, we'd had this call and we didn't know it was a drink driver to start with. It was just an accident. Now, it was very, very rural. I used to work in a place. I was probably in my first maybe 3 years of service, something like that. I was crewed up with quite an experienced cop. And we had this call out to, this rural location, sort of surrounded by fields and farms and things, really, really rural. No sort of signal out there. So I think it was someone from a farmhouse that had actually run us to say, there's been a big accident, car's gone off the road into the field, and I think it was on its roof, if I remember right. So we go hammering out on the blue lights to this job. No other cars involved is what we're told. Initially, of course, you never know that for sure, and don't forget that no matter what you get told on the phone doesn't necessarily mean that's what you're going to find. Somebody could have completely got the wrong end of the stick, so you do have to try and keep an open mind. So sure enough, we turn up, there's some very obvious broken fences, and then a pathway. It was corn, I think, in the field that was sort of partially grown, so it was about 2 or 3 foot tall, and there was this very obvious car width sort of shape running straight through the broken fence into the field and disappearing from view. So we go off and searching into the crops, and we're looking round, and it took us a while to find it. It sounds ridiculous, it's a car in a field, with nothing else in it apart from crops, but actually it had obviously tumbled as well. It had rolled, and various things had come off the car and out of the car. So you actually had several sort of debris fields, if you like, for want of a better word, that had spread off in all directions. So we had to sort of follow through all the paths of chaos basically through this crop until eventually we came to the car. Sure enough, it was on its roof. I mean, we got there maybe 10 minutes after it had gone on its roof, but it wasn't, it was still pretty hot and steaming. Thankfully, it hadn't burst into flames, but there was no one in it. And of course, we had no way of knowing, had there been like 5 people in here? Was it just one person? Was there no one in it? Had somebody pushed it into the field just for a laugh? Had someone stolen it and decided to, somehow wedge the accelerator down and drive it off? Kids mucking about, who knows? So, but again, you have to keep an open mind. And I'm afraid many times in the police, the police have been caught out with this one where they assume that, there's no one in it, or it was, it's been here for ages, or whatever it is. And then ultimately you found, someone, dead or dying nearby. So, you absolutely have to be 100% sure who was in that vehicle and where they are. So within the vehicle, though it wasn't obvious how many people had been in it, there was blood in the vehicle. So we could see some blood. We could see, some signs of kind of disturbance and a bit more blood on the floor, suggesting whoever it was had got out. So, you're assuming obviously they're injured and we need to find this person. But again, it wasn't an obvious track off through the field where it was leading to. So once again, we called in our friends, the police dog, fantastic resource. And we had a little bit of a wait. I think it was maybe 10 minutes or so, and the police dog turned up. Now, this is where they're fantastic, particularly in a rural area, so you haven't got an awful lot of smells. The only thing you might have that puts them off is, the old fox or deer or something, because if you're trying to track someone who's got out of a stolen car, for example, in a town centre, you've got all sorts of people who've crisscrossed that path, and it's really confusing for the dogs. So sometimes they find it a lot harder, to track through towns and villages. But in rural environments, when you've got a big old field like this with nothing else around it, if that wildlife's not present, or if it isn't immediately there, then you've got a good chance. So what happened was, doggy comes out, has a sniff round. Normally when they've got a decent scent, they're quite obvious. The handler will know, but you'll have a pretty good idea, because most of them sort of literally stick their head down and they're into kind of business mode, they're into work mode, they're tracking hard. So dog sets off at a blistering pace, and it's for the handler now, who's got him on about a 30-foot lead, to try and slow him down. And me and my colleague are sort of in hot pursuit, trying to keep up as well, because invariably the dog, I say dog men, but obviously dog officers are very, very fit, and because they, this is their life, these sort of fast tracks. So of course there's us with all our kit on, struggling to keep up, but needless to say, we did a reasonable job and we kept up with him. So the track went off about, 50 or 100 metres and down to a stream. Now, bearing in mind, this is night. This is the early hours, in fact. So, and it was quite moonlit. Now, I know I'm setting like a romantic scene here, but it wasn't like that, trust me. There was a river at the bottom of this hill, and the dog tracked down there. And we could see that there was somebody down there. There was a male down at the river. So we thought, fantastic, we found the guy. We're not quite sure why he's here, but maybe he's got a head injury. Perhaps he's dazed. You don't know what's happened to him. So we shout out to him, and he stands up, and he's actually washing his sort of head and face. He's got a cut on his head, quite a decent cut on his head. He's kind of dripping blood, but he's washing it off in the river. And again, you might think that's weird, but you have no clue to say what this person's been through, or what they've taken, or are they drunk, or whatever. Anyway, as soon as he stood up, and this was something like a horror movie, because he stood up, he turned to face us, and I immediately recognised him. Now, he looked the part because he had a bit of blood coming down his face anyway, but I immediately recognised him, and he was one of our local travellers. He was one of our local gypsies, and he was a very, very hard man. He was a bare-knuckle fighter, really, really tough guy, pathological hatred of the police, absolutely hated us. And I'd never, ever known of him being arrested without it ending in a big fight and invariably cops getting assaulted, Now, I remember this is in the days before tasers and, pepper spray or CS or anything like that. It was basically Ronnie and Reggie, as we'd call it, our fists. Maybe a sort of side handled baton if you had it, or if not, you might have still been using your little wooden truncheon that you were issued with, which I was actually issued with originally, but pretty useless, to be honest with you. So I recognised this guy straight away, and I looked at my colleague who also knew him as well, and the dog man, because the dog man was local. So all three of us knew who this was, and literally, my heart dropped. I was like, oh, Christ, this is going to hurt. This guy is a nightmare. So let's call him Steve. The bad guy's called Steve, and I'm sorry to all the Steves out there. But so we approach and go, oh, hi, Steve, how are you? Had a bit of an accident by the look of it, And of course, he's straight away, his back's up, and what's it got to do with you? Keep away from me, keep your distance. But he was already slurring his words, and we knew he was a drinker as well. So I was like, oh, for sure he's had a drink anyway, because there was just a tiny bit of hope that maybe he's just crashed his car and there's no one else involved, and that'd be the end of it. But no, of course not. We knew it was his car. He was definitely drunk. We could see it, without getting near him to breath test him, but he was sort of swaying about, and you could see it in his eyes. You could hear it in his slurring words. Interestingly, when these things come to court, in England, they're really hot that when you write statements, you give evidence, you never say the person smelt of alcohol, because there's a stated case down that way that alcohol doesn't smell of everything. And I'm talking about like 100% pure alcohol like you'd use in a scientific experiment does not smell of anything. So you stand up in court and the clever solicitor says, officer, you say that my client smelt strongly of alcohol, is that right? And you're all chuffy yourself, yes, that's right, it's very strongly of alcohol. And they go, brilliant, and what does alcohol smell of? And there's this pause where you kind of go, well, it was like a beer or some wine or whatever. You go, really? But that's not alcohol, So the particularly clever one, in the past, I've known them pass out literally 100% alcohol to the officer. Say, officer, take the lid off that bottle. So you take the lid off the bottle and you give it, right, sniff that and tell me what it smells of. Of course, 100% alcohol smells of nothing. So when you, of course, you smell this, and to your horror, you know exactly where he's going with it, and you're about to look very, very stupid in court. So the reality is, because without the smell of alcohol, or what we call in terms of evidence intoxicating liquor, some of your powers wouldn't exist, you see, to take breath tests or powers of entry and stuff. So they've only got to wriggle out of it by saying, well, you said he smelled of alcohol. He didn't, because alcohol hasn't got a smell. And that you then entered my client's house illegally, and arrested him, blah, blah, blah. You can see where it's going. So, yeah, you do have to be careful with this. So, yes, that's the point. It has to be in evidence. They smell strongly of intoxicating liquor. Sounds very old-fashioned, but that's why it's said and not alcohol. So, anyway, this guy, convinced he's drunk. Then there is a power that, you don't have to necessarily breath test someone. If they're so obviously drunk, and the classic is they open the car door or you open the car door and they fall out sideways at your feet. That's what they call a good section 4. That's an unfit to drive through drink or drugs. You don't need to breath test that person, not initially, because it's so blatantly obvious that they are drunk or drugged. So that would be a straight arrest. And that's pretty much where we were going with this guy. He was swaying about all over the place. But we knew we weren't going to get anywhere near him without a fight anyway. And already he was telling us to keep back, to keep our distance, etc. So, of course, we're trying to sweet talk him, take it easy, Steve. Let's not be silly. Look, we've got to take you down the neck. We'll talk this out. We need to look at your head and get sort of, course, he's like, I don't care about my head. My head's fine, and he's standing there literally pouring blood, and you're like, well, you've got a little bit of a cut on the head there, Steve. We need to get that looked at. I'm not going anywhere, and you lot can back off, and you're like, and at which point he bent down and picked up quite a decent sized branch next to him, that basically now he's got a kind of 3 foot long bat effectively, and says, the first one of you that comes near me is going to get it, So a bit of a difficult one, because we've certainly not got the reach to get him. But what we do have, of course, is our land shark with us. And at this point, of course, the whole time, the dog has been going absolutely crazy, desperate to be let off to attack this guy. But that hadn't happened at this point. So we tried to talk him down. He wasn't having it at all. There was no way. And ultimately, you've got to get hands on. We knew we weren't going to get close enough without getting walloped with this bit of wood, but we need to get hands on. We need to handcuff him, and he needs to get arrested. As simple as that, And this is where you earn your money, because you have to be able to do that. Much as you would love to just walk away, you can't do that. So sure enough, we get closer to the guy. We had a quick chat with the dog man. He said, right, you guys try and go and laying hands on. The moment he takes a swing for you with the stick, or, he starts fighting, basically step back, I'll give him a warning, I'll let the dog off. And that's exactly what happened. So we closed him down, got to within about, 4 feet of him. Thankfully, he was so drunk, he was now wildly swinging the piece of wood, trying to hit us. But it was, it was almost comical because you could see it coming a mile off, so you could just step out of the way because of him being so drunk. But we weren't going to get near to him without getting seriously injured. So in the end, he basically got his warning off the dog man, basically said that he was going to kill us all, and that was it. Dog got let off the lead. Sure enough, did his thing, went flying into this guy, knocked him over, and that's all it took for us to get in. Now, I'm always a little bit concerned about approaching these dogs, because this dog is in full-on werewolf mode, wants to rip whoever up, and of course you're now wanting to get in and get hold of that same arm that he's got in his mouth to get the handcuffs on. But equally, I didn't want this guy not handcuffed, because I wasn't sure which was more dangerous, the dog or this guy. So that's what we did, basically. We got stuck in, grabbed hold of the guy with the help of the dog man, and got him cuffed up, got him handcuffed. He got a good few bites for his trouble, but he was still fighting. I mean, it does not matter. We had to put 2 sets of cuffs on him because he was so broad and he was so wide in his shoulders. One set of cuffs, he couldn't bring his wrists close enough together. And that happens occasionally. So you have to use 2 sets of cuffs, so actually their arms can be far enough apart. But the dog had a right good chomp of him as well. But we managed, and he was now quite seriously injured on his arm. We could see he had some bad injuries on his arm, but he was just fighting the whole way. And even when he was cuffed, and dragged off to the van that had turned up, it was still a fight. He just didn't stop. This guy was just wild. So we had to take him to the hospital first, because he's got not only has he got this cut on his head, but he's also got quite a bad injury to the back of his arm, sort of his tricep area. So we take him off to hospital, and he gets seen to, but just fights and spits, and he's just horrible the whole time there. And once he figured out he was getting blood in his mouth, he was taking great pleasure in spitting blood everywhere. Again, we didn't have spit hoods then, which is something we have now, that you can put over people's heads to stop them doing this. So we did the best we could with trying to sort of not get spat on, but it wasn't very effective. So pretty unpleasant all round. I felt sorry for the staff as well, because they had to get close enough. And in the end, he had to have stitches on the back of his arm, where the dog had really chomped into his sort of tricep area. So we take him back to custody, and when people are fighting, normally you take them before the custody sergeant, explain why they've been arrested, and they take all their details if they're a civil sort of person. But he was anything but. He was still fighting and spitting and what have you. So he has to go straight off to the cell, and basically we'll speak to him when he's sober and when he's calmed down a bit. So eventually we did what's called a sort of cell withdrawal, a 3-man cell withdrawal, where he gets put on the floor onto a mat, and then the handcuffs get taken off, and then slowly people retreat while one person is left holding them pinned to the floor with a sort of a double wrist lock on. And then eventually that last person is quickly extracted from the cell, and in the same sort of movement the door is closed quite quickly. What you've got to be really careful of is you've got to close it quick enough they can't get out, but you still have to have a quick look, and not so quick that they manage to get up and get their fingers in the door, because people have, including cops, have actually lost fingers where they've managed to get hands in cell doors. They're big old metal doors, they get swung hard onto fingers. They're taking those fingers off. So that's definitely happened before. So that's something you have to be really aware of. But sure enough, we got out safe. He was left in the cell, uncuffed, still screaming and shouting and spitting and fighting and what have you. But we got away initially. And he was in a right old state. And the very last image I had of him, which is unbelievable, but it just shows you what sort of state he was in, was I looked through the peephole, the spy hole into cell to see if he was okay, which you should always do just to make sure, because on a couple of occasions when hands and things have been trapped in the doors, cops have just walked away and not actually realised what's happened. So they've walked away and the person in there's been trapped by their fingers for some time before it's been realised, you know. So a quick look through the hole, and when I looked through, to my horror, he's standing there and he's stripped off and he's now flexing kind of naked. And he was a big boy as well, you know, he was very muscular, still bleeding now because he's not only pulled out the stitches from his head, but while I was watching, he grabbed hold of the end stitch from the back of his tricep with his arm raised up like he was flexing his bicep, and got hold of the stitch and then pulled it out one by one. I think it was about 20 stitches in the back of his arm. And as he pulled the stitches out, so the skin and actually the muscle of his tricep dropped away from the kind of, you know, the skin and the arm. So now you got this, you know, grisly scene where you're looking through and I'm actually seeing him with his arm raised and the tricep of the muscle and the skin actually sort of flapping down and swinging about as he's still banging on the cell door and fighting. I mean, Jesus, you know, this guy just wouldn't give up, you know. So, drink drivers. It's, you know, people do get themselves in a right old state. I mean, the one good thing about that incident was that no one else was injured, because unfortunately I have been to quite a few fatal accidents involving drink drivers, but on that occasion, just him. But certainly one I remember because of how it ended with the tricep thing, you know, pretty awful. But I mean, what sort of state, you know, have you got to get into to be able to do that yourself and not, you know, not flinch? It's incredible, really. But there we go. So that's it. That's the one for this week. Hopefully it was interesting, and keep coming back for more. Downloads are continuing, so thank you for that. Got ourselves, as you know, on YouTube, Police Stories podcasts, and also on pretty much every sort of app, you know, for podcasts and stuff. Been trying to get on Twitter or X a bit more to get ourselves out there, and yes, it's been working, I think. But certainly appreciate it if you know anyone else that likes sort of true crimey police type stuff. Maybe point them in our direction. That'd be good. If not, I will speak to you again soon, almost certainly next week. Thanks very much for listening. Take it easy. Bye.